Hey guys, welcome back. BDCKR here. We're back with a season 13, episode 10 of our weekly Q&A thing. It's YouTube, it's podcast, it's those two things. So
it's everything.
Yeah. To start off, we sometimes like to talk about stuff going on in the world or whatever. I say to start off, but really we spend the whole time talking about kind of whatever we want, right?
Right. But a lot of times, whatever we want has to do with some questions that people have asked us, whether it's the actual question or whether it makes us think of something else.
Yeah, we feel some amount of responsibility to talk about injustice to some extent, mostly because that's ostensibly what our channel is, but this is really just us talking about whatever. But you wanted to talk about something.
So, all right. So before we get to that, so that everybody gets their dose of injustice, this is a team of what we expect to be this week's challenge character, Arkham Origins Joker. You can see in the fight, so he's got a very similar to Arkham Knight Catwoman in that he has damage over time that increases with each Arkham teammate. As opposed to every Arkham Knight, but similar idea. And he doesn't have the can't rinse it, but he has in some ways it's almost better. He gets the extra ability from Quick Engine that nobody else gets that locks people in from tagging out for an extra, 8 seconds, something big. While if he's the one holding Quick Engine. So that actually makes a difference. The problem is his special 2, the damage over time, is pretty weak. Even when you do it really, score really high on the minigame, you never see them bleed out. Now, the flip side is the Blackest Night Flash team is not as dangerous. But the problem is it also means he's less effective against everybody else. So I'm not a big fan. Okay. And we'll play around more with him this week leading up to Thursday when we do our weekly recap.
Yeah, for sure.
Okay. So like you were saying about what's happening this week. So big time in the news in general for us is the whole concept of Trump threatening to annex Canada.
Yeah.
Basically declaring war on Canada because he would to erase the trade deficit because then it would be all internal. To have access to our resources, our natural resources.
But that he's talking about making Canada the 51st state.
So this is the problem, right? There's a way you can frame that question. And I think there's a journalist on CBC called, his name is Ian Hanomansing. He has something, Cross Canada program that he does. And this week's program on Sunday was about Trump's idea of, hey, let's just grab Canada because we want it.
Yeah.
And I didn't watch the program. And this was all controversy before. But I agree with a lot of people who were criticizing him for the title of the program and framing it in a way.
Yeah, so what was the title of the program?
All right, so let me pull that up. Hold on, I don't want to get it wrong. It was originally called... hold on.
51st state.
What does Canada as a 51st state mean to you?
No, that was the way that the question to the audience was framed.
That was original. That's the title they retitled it after.
No, the title.
Yeah, the program title, they retitled it after. It wasn't exactly that. So it was the
51st State of Cross-Border Conversation was the title of the program.
Eventually, that's what they settled on at the end.
The question was, what does Canada as a 51st state mean to you?
So the problem is, there's two levels of failure here, I think. One is that as a question, to entertain it, you can run into the problem of, do you legitimize the idea that's even feasible for the United States to annex Canada?
Yeah.
And that's not that big a failure, I think, because I think it's a legitimate question. I think there really is a threat from, the current U.S. administration because they really just are that stupid and crazy. The failure is in asking the question in a way that, the idea of the Overton window, right?
Yeah.
Where you shift the discourse enough so that people are starting to think about it in a way that you want that's more favorable to you. It's the same with negotiations where when whoever says the first price is anchoring the idea of where the money's, the cost.
Or the idea of sort of shifting goalposts, right? And just allowing somebody unreasonable, right? To set the terms and tone of the conversation, right? Where, obviously we are reacting to what Trump is saying,
Sure.
right? But by starting the conversation from a point of...
And using his words
Yeah.
is a failure. It is a complete failure of recognizing what's actually being suggested.
Yeah.
So using those terms, I saw somebody online put it in a way that made a lot of sense. So if somebody's stalking you,
Mm-hmm.
like they're literally harassing you and stalking you, and they say, I'm going to marry you.
Mm-hmm.
The question you ask the person who's being harassed and stalked isn't, so what do you think it would be like to be married to this person?
Mm-hmm.
The question is, hold on, how do we stop this from happening?
Yeah.
And so when you frame it like, 51st state, like it makes it almost seem benign, but really it is a threat of war.
Mm-hmm.
Like there's no way that there might be some weirdos. Like there's maybe like a really small minority of Canadians who would think, oh yeah, I'd like to be part of the States. And the great majority of Canadians, and, other than just general conversations I've had, I have not taken a poll, a statistically accurate poll by sampling a representative number of people in Canada.
Yeah.
But I think the general consensus is no way.
Mm-hmm.
And it would be war. So when you use the aggressor's language, right? Then what you're doing is you are ceding that ground to them and allowing them to shift the conversation in a way that makes this idea seem somehow reasonable without using the proper language of recognizing this is an act of aggression.
Mm-hmm.
This is completely unreasonable. This is not an ally.
Yeah.
This is the way an enemy talks.
Mm-hmm.
So, anyway.
Because it's the way that he is sort of diminishing and dismissive of Canada. And, I have a very limited amount of like civic pride for Canada as a country, right? There's a lot of issues with a lot of the way that we operate. There are things that I like, and I am also in general hesitant to give ourselves a pat on the back just by comparing ourselves to America, right? Because it's very easy to say, well, at least we're better than these guys, and then point to somebody who's obviously worse and use that as a way of sort of excusing yourself, right? But in that same sense, right? Like I am able to very easily evaluate between relatively better and worse things. And for as little as I'm maybe not exceptionally proud of Canada for how it operates in a lot of different ways, but I am certainly I much prefer it to the States. And this is really that's direct conversation, right? Where it's in most circumstances, I'll be hesitant to go, oh, well, Canada's great. And comparing it to the States is my example or my justification, right? But here we are directly talking about like what would it be like to be a part of the United States versus not. Yeah, and again, that to me is such an easier calculus to do, right?
And again, I'm going to frame it a little bit differently. It's not to be a part of the United States. It's to be annexed by the United States.
Yeah.
To be at war with the United States and have them take us by force.
Mm-hmm.
See, and here's the thing. I'm going to go you a little bit differently. I'm going to say that I am actually proud to be Canadian, the way I can be proud of other things and still recognize that there are places for improvement.
Mm-hmm.
Because, and my perspective might be a little bit different as an immigrant to Canada.
Yeah.
So I was not born in Canada. I came when I was very young. And I am, for all its flaws, for all the crappy things that happened when I was a kid, that I think I can lay at the feet of Canada, right? Because there's a unique, it's a unique place. There's things that, it's not just the country though. It was of its time too. So I don't think there's any country that's perfect, but I can still be proud of the country that accepted me when I was young
mm-hmm.
and needed a place. And it's fair. I think you're right that it's not enough to be able to compare yourself to other places, but holy crap, am I grateful for how much better Canada is than a lot of other places we could have ended up.
I think there are ways that I'm grateful for Canada, and I think that's it's a tough thing to untangle, right? I think about our past, continued, and likely future treatment of Indigenous people, right? I think of lack of access to water. And it's hard to hold that in my head and be aware of that and be proud of the country that we are, given our resources and ability to fix and improve that situation, right? There's a lot of ways in which I'm grateful that I live in Canada, right? And I think that to me is less of how I feel about something in aggregate, right? And more of how I feel about something in specific. And it's kind of like when, you know, you look at flawed, maybe if it's, there's somebody flawed who like makes a piece of media that you really like, right? And it's the level of, you know, what's the difference between saying like, I like this work or I can still enjoy this work versus I am like proud to be a fan, right? And I think there's to me, there's a lot of reasons that I am grateful to live in Canada and to have the circumstances I do. And I don't know if I can say that extends to the level of me saying that I'm proud of being Canadian or proud of Canada as a country. But I don't begrudge other people. If they are not purposefully ignoring or discounting, you know, shortcomings, I'm not interested in sort of chastising other people for feeling differently than me.
So I think what you said earlier actually comes into play is the context. And I think it is very easy for me to say that I'm proud to be Canadian in this context of the United States being belligerent towards us.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I think it absolutely matters. And because there's that comparison, it's very easy to look at it and say, so, yeah, we are that much better than the States in so many different ways.
Relatively speaking, yeah. For sure. And yeah, it's a hard and delicate balance, right? It's interesting because
well, people are complicated and we are people.
Yeah. So it's hard to know how I feel on a day to day. And I think one of the things about that too is that language is very squishy, right? So I'm kind of imposing my own understanding and value and way of sort of processing this language. And I'm drawing a very specific and narrow line that I think a lot of people probably wouldn't draw. And that I don't know if I exactly drew that before I like talked about it and worked it out, right? Where most language is flexible enough that it can mean very different things to different people and still be sort of accurate in all cases, right? In those cases. Yeah.
I mean, there's two good things about what's going on. One is that the federal party that calls themselves the Conservatives, but who are really the Reform Alliance, rebranded, they are losing their lead in the polls comparing federal parties because I think people are making the correct association between the kind of things that Trump is doing and the kind of things that Pierre Poilievre is promising.
Yeah.
And recognizing also that somebody like Poilievre is probably not going to be the most effective person to stand up to a bully. And the second thing that's I think is good is that there's situations, right? How you deal with stuff every day. Most everyday situations are not a big deal. And sometimes when situations are a big deal, it's hard to recognize it. Like when you have an emergency, like how do you decide when somebody's choking enough that you need to give them Heimlich?
Yeah.
Like that kind of, even if you know how to do the Heimlich maneuver, that inertia between, oh, it's just going to pass. I'm not going to make a big deal about it. I'll feel really silly if I break somebody's ribs a little bit while I'm trying to get food out of their throat.
But they didn't need it. Yeah.
Right. The joke is if you can say Heimlich, you don't need it.
Yeah.
But the beauty of it is that the current U.S. administration has declared itself so clearly and without any ambiguity that, you know what? It's not worth negotiating with us because what we negotiate will never matter.
Yeah.
There's no chance that if you offer something of value that it will make a difference to get you what you want because whatever they negotiate, like the Canada, U.S., Mexico trade alliance, that agreement that Trump actually signed and said it was the greatest agreement ever, just thrown in the trash.
Yeah. To your point, there's a really good and interesting video by Innuendo Studios. I must have given him a shout out previous on the channel. But he has a series called the Alt-Right Playbook, and he released his final episode of it recently, or at least he said it's his final one. which is called the south bank of the Rubicon, right? And it's the idea of the term of crossing the Rubicon as like this is like a bridge too far, right? The Rubicon in history, it was if an army crossed the bank of the Rubicon, that would be considered a declaration of war, right? And so it's become a metaphor. And so you should really watch the video. I'm going to sort of summarize it poorly here. But for everybody listening to this who thinks this idea is even a little interesting, watch the video. The idea is that how things work in real life, there's not those clear delineations, right?
Yeah, for
and
sure.
a lot of it's very similar to what you were saying, right? If not the same thing as what you were saying, which is just that you always you have these lines and then they get moved and pushed a little bit. And you use some examples of things that Trump has done that if you were talking about them in a vacuum before they happened, you might say that's the Rubicon, right?
Yeah.
And the way that you can redraw the lines for yourself and other people can redraw the lines for you, right? Like, you know, the idea of like you are keeping children in cages, right? Would that be, if you were talking about that in abstract when it wasn't happening, you go, yeah, this would be unacceptable, right? And a lot of people would. And so the call to action of that video is that you need to draw your line yourself now. If X, Y, or Z happens, that is crossing the Rubicon. And when that happens, this is what I, as an individual, feel like I should be doing about it, right? This is how I should be mobilizing and taking action.
The problem is if you don't rehearse it in your mind even, like never mind assigning a boundary. Like this is important even just between people in interpersonal relationships, right? If you're not willing or able to set boundaries, then it doesn't matter. But even if you can set boundaries, once you've done that hard work, if you can't imagine yourself doing the action that you need, a lot of times you can be frozen in inaction. It's why in emergencies there's people who are standing around thinking somebody else is going to do it. And the difference between somebody doing it and somebody not can be as little as you point to somebody and say, hey, you do this. This is what they teach you in CPR.
Yeah, they say you in the yellow shirt, call 911, and then...
you can't.
One thing I saw that was interesting, that was a sort of cool perspective thing for me, was I saw somebody talking about the idea that boundaries aren't something that you impose on other people. They are a set of rules
you set for yourself. For you're protecting your own boundaries. Absolutely.
Because, you know, as much you want other people to respect your boundaries, right?
Sure.
In a good or healthy relationship, and this is not just romantic, this is just any type of relationship, right? If you set boundaries clearly, they will be followed and respected by the other person. But in a bad or unhealthy relationship, they will ignore your boundaries and then say, now what, right? And it is ultimately a thing that you have to actually maintain for yourself.
Sure.
And that is both helpful as a perspective thing, right? It's harder. But the other thing that it does is it sort of lets you think about and see when somebody is calling something a boundary when it's not, right? When somebody's saying, I don't like it when you do that thing. And if they just say the words, that's a boundary for me, right? You have to think about, you know, what does that mean in actuality? And that's not to say that you shouldn't respect other people's boundaries, because obviously you should, right? But people will use the language of boundaries in some cases to take advantage of you or to enforce behavior on you because you care about them and you don't want to sort of mistreat them or disrespect them. So there's cases where, you know, somebody can say like, you violated my boundary, and then you can look at a situation and go, this is not unreasonable to expect it was okay to do. I had no information or understanding beforehand that it was not okay, where what they're really saying is, I didn't like when you did that thing. And it's okay to not like when somebody does something, even if it, you know...
Well, you can establish a boundary after the fact, but it doesn't mean that it was already there and it was recognizable.
Yeah, and that's different from you having done something malicious, right? If somebody says, you violated my boundary and that made me really upset, you know, and you go, oh, well, I had no way of knowing that. You can say, I'm sorry for making you feel this way. I don't want to, and this is a behavior that I can change. But what you aren't in a position to do is feel like culpable or responsible for something that you were in no position to actually work around beforehand, because if you don't know, you don't know.
Right, exactly. It's like anything. If you don't know, when you're playing a game, when you're doing whatever, if you don't know the rules of engagement, then you can't be nearly as responsible for what you do if you don't know what you were supposed to have done. No, I totally agree.
Yeah, so that was just something interesting and helpful. It's one of those organizing things where I think a lot of times, you know, when we talk about, you know, crossing the Rubicon, we talk about boundaries, we talk about all of these things. They are inarguably important terms. They are terms that we see some amount of use of, right? Crossing the Rubicon, maybe not in certain contexts, but, you know, I'm sure some people do hear that as sort of like a metaphor or a discussion point in their day to day. But what's really important is making those things specific, concrete, and actionable, because when you have this idea of boundaries that is like loose and ill-defined in your head, it's very easy for it to be something that you understand is important, but aren't able to actually use in an effective way, right? When you have the idea of this is a bridge too far and it's always something in the future, it's not useful to you if you allow the definition and your line to keep sliding.
And one of a good mental exercise sometimes is, again, whether it's boundaries, whether it's whatever, is that if you want to plan, you consider the different possibilities of what could happen. And if you want to make decisions, then you can at least in your mind imagine, okay, so if this happened, would I do it? Figure out if this is enough and figure out a spot where it's not enough if you have trouble figure out where your boundary is. And once you've got those 2 points, then you can actually start working your way towards figuring out how much is too much. How much can you put up with? What would be too much? Because I think a lot of times when people end up and staying in abusive relationships is that they haven't done that exercise and they've allowed themselves. I mean, the analogy is like the frog, the untrue analogy is like the frog in the pot of water, where if you raise the temperature slowly, it will just stay there and let it boil itself to death. But I think I've read somewhere that that's not true, that frogs will actually get out.
Interesting.
But
well, that's the point of getting out too, is like, that's what a boundary is. It's this is my boundary, and if this boundary is violated, this is what I'll do about it, right? So if somebody's just saying you violated my boundary, you know, it's okay for them to not have the exact words, and I'm not saying, in some cases you might have just done something wrong, right? But the actual second part that is important and necessary for it to really be a boundary is for them to say, if this happens again, or because this happened, here is what I'm going to do about it to protect that boundary, right? And so, you know, I do want to just reiterate one more time. People can use the wrong words and you can still address what their underlying thing is, right? I'm not saying that, and then the next time that you hurt somebody, you violate their boundary, you go, oh, well, you know, if you're not enforcing it, then it's not a real boundary, right?
But if this is the thing too, though, this is why words are so important, because if you don't recognize what they're saying, if they're saying something that doesn't make sense because they're using words in a different way, part of what happens is you feel a little bit uncomfortable. Like there's something about it that doesn't feel quite right when you're hearing it. And what you don't want to do is let that get into the way of you doing the right thing. If you think, well, that's not a boundary, the answer isn't, well,
to tell them that they're using the wrong word.
The idea is figure out what they're actually doing and respond to what is actually happening, even if it's not quite exactly how they're describing it. And that's what decent people do. Or decent and self-aware people do.
That's at least how it's supposed to go in relationships that have good mutual respect and where people are trying their best for each other. Anyways, a little off topic, but I think that's an important.
I think that's pretty on topic, actually.
It's like what's happening in the world. Connect. That's true. So what's our boundary with the States?
I think I don't think I can conceptualize enough, because right now what's happening is just so far beyond the pale that I think if there is any kind of, I mean, right now my boundary is I am not traveling the States at all. We had friends that are going to spring training because they like the Blue Jays. And I was so surprised when they mentioned that they were still going with no real consideration. Like, it wasn't even that it was on their radar to consider not going. It was a more comment of, you know, hey, you could be in a couple of days, if you want to come with us, you could be enjoying the sun and watching a baseball game. And in my mind, I think my boundary is somewhere before that. Right now, until the threat of destabilization, of economic chaos is gone, I will do my level best not to put more money into the pockets of Americans. Not all Americans voted for Trump. Not all Americans are responsible for what's happening. However, the only people that can change it are Americans by voting in the next election or by taking action against their current leaders.
You are trying to engage as in part of like a collective decision-making process that will put consequences to the actions and decisions of the United States.
Sure.
Government.
And until they're willing to vigorously and explicitly dissociate themselves, and most of them haven't, companies haven't dissociated themselves from the current administration, then I think it's totally fair. I mean, people can complain, well, you know, if you're costing Americans their jobs, it wasn't their fault that they voted for Trump, they didn't know is one level.
Yeah.
Or they didn't vote for him. And I said, well, that's fine, but I didn't vote for him either. And not only that, I had no choice. I'm even further removed, and I'm not interested in having our country annexed. I'm not interested in having our industries destroyed by tariffs. I think the beauty of Trump declaring himself so clearly is that whatever other diplomatic noises the Canadian government makes about trying to maintain the relationship with the States, you know that your energy is better spent creating different relationships with other countries than it is with trying to repair the current relationship with the States.
Yeah. And I also think that the distinction for me, at least a little bit, is there's a little bit of a difference between trying not to support the States and trying to buy local and support Canada, right? Where, or support Canadian businesses, right?
Yes.
Where I think like, you know, it's not that the grocery stores are putting stickers on everything that is a US product, right? And saying, don't buy these. What they're doing is they're putting stickers on Canadian products, right?
Right.
Which is, the difference is that these decisions are meant to have some degree of cost to Canadian business and manufacturing and infrastructure. And what we're attempting to do is largely reinvest in and spend our money mostly on Canadian products, right?
Sure.
Where you're not specifically researching and going, well, I'm not buying this because it's from the States, but I will buy from any country that's not the, or maybe you are.
Well,
right?
but it's different. Like, I mean, travel to the States is clearly bringing the Americans. And when you buy, you're not really actually helping the industries that are going to be affected by tariffs.
Yeah.
Right? They're not connected, but it is intricately connected. The idea that if you don't support the United States, the money is going somewhere else. And if you support Canadian, it is money that's not going towards the United States.
Yeah. So there we go.
And the one exception I'm willing to make is for Costco. The whole idea of using language and weaponizing language by taking actually good terms and trying to make them into insults and pejoratives. Costco is one of the few companies in the States that has stood by their DEI initiatives. And I am totally willing to support Costco in Canada, even though they're an American company, because they represent something that's actually good.
Yeah. And I think also the important thing too is that, you know, there's levels that you have to be willing to take. And I think for me personally, at least, my line is that I'm not going to negatively impact noticeably my own quality of life for my sort of purchasing decisions. And Costco, for what it is cheap, practical, and whatever else. So there's a real ease. Like if Costco was directly engaged in harm, right, that would be a different calculus. But sort of as a secondary or tertiary concern of like, oh, they are like ultimately owned by Americans, right? The difference in cutting Costco out of our lives is like enough of a difference where I don't think that's worth the ideological stand, when you also take into account that they do they have stood up for the things that they believe in.
Yeah, not black and white. There's absolutely shades of gray, and sometimes you have to find the balance because there are not enough alternatives that you can completely divest yourself from any kind of American influence. I mean, we're uploading this to YouTube.
Yeah, that's true.
Owned by Google.
Yeah.
American company.
Who actually has rolled back some of their DEI initiatives.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
We're basically out of time here, but let's do a quick one.
I want to do a question.
This one comes from Musili4435. They say, how can I promote cards whose promotions cannot be bought?
Oh, you skipped one.
For example, online cards with credits. That's a longer one, yeah.
Okay.
So this says, how can I promote cards whose promotions cannot be bought? For example, online cards with credits.
Yeah, right now you can't. There used to be a really interesting glitch that we sort of referred to, and if you don't watch the video, you won't know what it means. So we do a recap video every week we refer to once a month all the different tutorial videos for how to do glitches. There's one glitch that is in that sort of purgatory, that in between state, that it's sort of the
that has not been found to be patched.
Schrodinger's.
Is
it Schrodinger's? Is it pronounced Schrey or Schro?
I don't know.
Schrodinger's glitch, where it requires very specific circumstances. Those circumstances have not been around for years, but every time those circumstances have been extant, that they have been available, then this glitch has worked. But at one point, the conditions were there for like a week, and then it became a few days, and then the last time it was like maybe a day.
Yeah, and then it seems like they've changed it
so
on
it never
purpose
happens.
so that the conditions never arise, because that's easier than patching the glitch itself.
Yeah.
So the fact that they changed it to make it so that the conditions didn't exist, to me, is the best evidence that the glitch probably does still function.
Right.
That allows you to promote characters that are locked in your store that you can't otherwise purchase.
For your own interest, it might be worth just checking out that video, only just so that you can be prepared if there's that one chance that it ever comes back. So the same way some of the missing challenge characters come back. Because if you've only got like a few hours to do it, there's no way you're going to learn it fast enough from scratch. Find it, learn it, and execute it fast enough to get what you need. So what it allows you to do is...
be prepared.
Yeah. What it allows you to do is take whatever currency that they were available in and use those currencies to buy that character. So whatever they sell for... So I think as an example of where it will work is pretty much every challenge character. An example of where it doesn't work is Killing Joke Joker, because he needs alliance credits.
Yeah.
So if anything, you'd want the opposite, because there's the Most Wanted pack. So I think you can get Killing Joke Joker that way, sell him back, get the alliance credits. You don't even really need... actually, Most Wanted pack is for cash. Never mind. So it's that kind of thing. So you can watch the video. It's a little bit of fun. We did a version of the video each time the glitch happened, but it became increasingly clear that there's almost towards the end that there's also no point redoing the video, because by the time we knew it happened, we recorded another video showing it and posted it.
It would be gone.
The glitch was gone.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So there we go. And that does it for this week. To finish up, we'd like to give a huge thank you to all of our lovely patrons on Patreon. That is Michael Devries, Irvin, Ruiz, Hoshi127, and Nora Klimek supporting us on the credited level. We'd also like to give a huge thank you to everybody who supports us however you support us, and that includes watching all the way to the end of the video. Thank you so much for watching. We'll see you next time.
Komoda.